Sandra's bouquet slipped from her trembling fingers before she could stop it. White roses scattered across the marble floor of St. Michael's Cathedral like fallen stars, their petals bruising under the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching her world collapse in real time. She didn't bend to pick them up. Couldn't. Because Brandon, her fiancé, the man she'd loved for 2 years, the man who'd proposed on a sunset beach in the Hamptons, was walking toward the altar with a microphone in his hand and murder in his eyes. Not literal murder. The social kind. The kind that happened in a church full of Manhattan's elite on a Saturday afternoon when a size 18 black woman dared to believe she deserved a fairy tale ending. "Don't," Sandra whispered, but her voice died in her throat. No microphone, no amplification, just her and the awful certainty that whatever came next would change everything. Brandon's hand wrapped around the microphone stand. Pastor Williams tried to intercept him, one hand outstretched, confusion etched across his weathered face. But Brandon brushed past him like he wasn't even there. The sound system crackled to life. "I need everyone here to understand something." Brandon's voice boomed through the cathedral, bouncing off stained glass windows that had witnessed a century of weddings. His voice was steady, rehearsed, like he'd been planning this moment for weeks. "I tried. God knows I tried." Sandra's legs locked, her custom wedding gown, $12,000 of ivory silk and delicate beadwork that had taken 4 fittings to perfect, suddenly felt like a costume. Like she was a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's closet, pretending to be something she could never actually be. Beautiful, wanted, enough. "But I can't do this." Brandon turned to face her fully now, and Sandra saw it. That look. The same expression he'd worn 3 months ago when his college friends had come to their apartment for drinks. When he thought she was in the bedroom, but she'd been standing in the hallway, frozen, listening to him laugh about managing expectations and waiting for the trust fund to clear. Her financial advisor had called her 2 weeks ago, frantic, talking about forged signatures and loan documents Sandra had never seen, talking about how Brandon had put her name on debts that would bankrupt her if she didn't act fast. She told herself it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. She told herself a lot of lies. "Look at her," Brandon said into the microphone, and Sandra felt every person in that cathedral shift their gaze to her body. Her arms, her hips, her stomach. Every curve she'd spent her entire life trying to minimize, trying to apologize for, trying to hide under strategic layering and dark colors. "I can't marry someone who looks like this. I can't have a wife who makes people stare for all the wrong reasons." The congregation gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind rushing through a tunnel. Sandra's mother sobbed from the front pew, a broken animal sound that Sandra felt in her bones. But Sandra couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there while Brandon, the man who'd whispered, "I love you" 1,000 times, who'd held her hand during her grandmother's funeral, who'd promised her forever, turned her body into a crime scene. "Do you know what it's like?" Brandon's voice dropped lower, intimate in a way that made Sandra's skin crawl. The microphone caught every word anyway. "Pretending not to notice the looks when we walk into restaurants, making excuses to my colleagues about why I'm with someone so substantial? My mother asked if you were pregnant when she saw our engagement photos. That's how big you look in pictures, Sandra. That's what people think when they see us together." Tears burned tracks down Sandra's face, hot and shameful and unstoppable. She could see her bridesmaids, girls she'd known since medical school, huddled together near the altar. Eyes wide, mouths open. Not one of them moving to help her. Not one of them telling Brandon to stop. They just watched. Everyone just watched. The only reason Brandon stepped closer now, and Sandra could smell the whiskey on his breath. He'd been drinking, before the ceremony, before walking down the aisle, before promising to love and cherish her until death. "The only reason I stayed this long was your trust fund. You know that, right? The inheritance from your grandmother. My accountant told me I'd have access once we married. Consolidate the assets, pay off my debts, start fresh." Sandra's mind spun, her trust fund, the money her grandmother, a woman who'd worked as a nurse for 40 years, who'd saved every penny, had left her. The money Sandra had been planning to use for a down payment on a brownstone, for starting a family, for building a life with the man she loved. "But you know what?" Brandon's smile was cruel, sharp enough to cut. "It's not worth it. I can't stomach the thought of waking up next to you every morning, of introducing you as my wife, of having our wedding photos plastered all over social media with you breaking the frame. He handed the microphone back to Pastor Williams, who took it with shaking hands. So congratulations, Sandra. Brandon's voice carried even without amplification now. The cathedral had gone so silent that a pin drop would have sounded like an explosion. You finally found out what everyone else already knew. You were never bride material. You're just too much woman in all the wrong ways. He turned on his heel, started walking down the aisle, away from her, away from the altar, toward the massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral and the freedom beyond them. Sandra's knees buckled. She didn't fall. Muscle memory from years of 12-hour surgeries kept her upright, but she swayed. The world tilted. Her vision blurred with tears that wouldn't stop coming. This was it. This was how her story ended, alone at an altar in front of 300 people who would remember this day forever, who would whisper about it at dinner parties, who would use her name as a cautionary tale. Remember Sandra? Poor thing, she really thought he'd go through with it. Brandon was halfway down the aisle now. Almost to freedom. Almost to click. The sound cut through the cathedral like a blade. Metal sliding against metal. Sharp, precise, unmistakable. Click. There it was again. Coming from the back pew. Click. A third time? Click. A fourth. 4 synchronized sounds that made every person in that cathedral freeze. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Sandra's vision cleared just enough to see them. 4 men rising from the last pew in perfect unison. 4 identical faces. 4 expensive suits in colors that didn't belong at a wedding. Deep wine red, midnight blue, rich gold, deep emerald green. The fabric looked like it cost more than Sandra's car. The men looked like they could end the world without breaking a sweat. Brandon froze mid-step, his face drained of color. The man in wine red spoke first. His voice carried through the cathedral without any need for amplification. Deep, controlled, absolutely lethal. That's quite enough. Korean accent, subtle but present. Each word chosen with surgical precision. They began to walk. 4 abreast, down the center aisle, toward Brandon, toward Sandra, toward the altar where her life had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. Their footsteps echoed like a death march. Hey, bestie. Yes, you. You've made it this far into Sandra's story, which means you and I, we're connected now. We're in this together. And I need you to do something for me before we go any further, before we find out who these 4 dangerous men are and why they're about to turn this wedding into a battlefield. Hit that subscribe button. Right now, I'm serious. Every subscriber is like a vote of confidence. A little voice saying, hey, your stories matter. And trust me, this story, it's about to get wild. While you're at it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know where my besties are. I want to see how far Sandra's story is traveling. Because this isn't just entertainment. This is about representation. About seeing ourselves in stories where we're not just the sidekick or the stereotype, where we're the queen. So comment below, where are you watching from? And what do you think is about to happen? Now let's get back to Sandra, because those 4 men in designer suits are about 10 seconds away from doing something that will change her life forever. Sandra recognized them. Oh God, she recognized them. The Lee brothers. Quadruplets. Sons of the most powerful Korean family in New York's underground economy. The family that owned half of Koreatown. That had their hands in import-export businesses, real estate, private security, and a dozen other ventures that existed in the gray area between legal and not quite legal. The family whose grandmother Sandra had saved 3 years ago. It had been a Tuesday night. Sandra had just finished a 16-hour shift at Mount Sinai. She'd been walking to her car, exhausted, when she'd heard shouting from the ER entrance. An elderly Korean woman having a cardiac event. The attending physician, Dr. Morrison, a man who'd been reprimanded twice for bias in patient care, had taken one look at the woman's Medicaid card and decided she wasn't worth the effort. Probably just indigestion, he'd said. Tell them to take her to a clinic in the morning. Sandra had been a resident then. Morrison outranked her. Interfering meant risking her career, risking his retaliation, risking everything she'd worked for. She'd done it anyway. She'd spent 14 hours with that woman. Through 2 more cardiac events, holding her hand, speaking broken Korean she'd learned from YouTube videos, telling her about her own grandmother, making her feel human when everyone else saw a liability. The woman had survived. 6 months later, Sandra had received a phone call. The woman's granddaughter, a girl named Ji-woo, had been diagnosed with leukemia, 16 years old, bright, scared. dying because her family couldn't afford the treatment at the best facilities. Sandra had emptied her trust fund, $300,000, every penny her grandmother had left her. She'd made the donation anonymously, asked for no acknowledgement, no contact. Just knowing the girl would live had been enough. Apparently, it hadn't been anonymous enough, because now the Lee brothers were walking down the aisle of St. Michael's Cathedral, and Sandra knew, she knew, they were here because of her. Brandon tried to run. He made it exactly 4 steps before Taeyang, the one in wine red, the eldest by 3 minutes, the enforcer, crossed the remaining distance with inhuman speed. His fist connected with Brandon's jaw. The sound was like a baseball bat hitting concrete. Brandon crumpled. His body sprawled across the white rose petals Sandra had dropped, blood trickling from his split lip, staining the flowers crimson. "Stay down," Taeyang said quietly. There was no anger in his voice. Just certainty. Just inevitability. "If you stand up, I'll put you back down, and it won't be gentle." The groomsmen started forward, some misguided sense of loyalty propelling them toward their fallen friend. Taeyang didn't even turn around. He simply shifted his stance, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, every muscle promising violence, and they froze mid-step. "Anyone else?" Taeyang asked the crowd. Silence answered him. Jinwoo, the one in midnight blue, the strategist, the one who could calculate odds and plan operations 3 moves ahead of everyone else, surveyed the congregation with cold assessment. "You will remember this day," Jinwoo announced, his voice carrying an authority that made even Pastor Williams stand straighter. "You will remember that you sat in silence while a good woman was humiliated, while a man who was not fit to breathe her air tried to break her spirit." Haejun, the one in rich gold, the charmer, the one who could talk his way into anywhere and out of anything, appeared at Sandra's side, his hand extended toward her. His voice was gentler than his brother's, but no less dangerous. "Dr. Williams," he said softly, "you shouldn't be standing here. Not in front of these people who watched him destroy you and said nothing." Sandra stared at his hand like it was a weapon. I don't understand." "You will." Haejun reached down and carefully gathered the scattered roses, reconstituting her bouquet with surprising delicacy. "But not here. Not in front of an audience that doesn't deserve to witness what happens next." The 4th brother, Sung-ho, the one in deep emerald green, the tech genius, the one who saw everything and knew everything, moved to the center of the altar. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen 3 times. Every person in that cathedral heard their phones buzz simultaneously. A message, sent to everyone. Sandra couldn't see what it said, but she saw the reactions. The wide eyes, the dropped jaws, the sudden collective intake of breath. "That," Sung-ho said pleasantly, "is every dirty secret about Brandon Hayes that I've uncovered in the last 72 hours. The gambling debts, the forged documents, the women he's been seeing behind Dr. Williams' back, the plan to bankrupt her and disappear to Singapore. It's all there. Screenshots, bank statements, text messages, everything." He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Consider it a wedding gift. Share it widely." Brandon groaned from the floor. Taeyang's foot pressed down on his back, keeping him prone like a butterfly pinned to a board. Jinwoo descended from the altar and approached Sandra's other side. The 4 brothers formed a square around her now. A living fortress. "The vows were for you," Taeyang said simply. His dark eyes met Sandra's, and she saw something there that made her heart stop and restart in the same breath. Not pity. Not disgust. Something that looked dangerously like rage on her behalf. "We will marry you. We will protect you. We will worship you the way this fool never could." "All 4 of you?" Sandra's voice cracked. "That's not even." "1 legal marriage," Jinwoo clarified, his strategist's mind already working through logistics. "The others are ceremonial, private, but equally binding in the ways that matter. You'll have our name, our protection, our resources, everything we are becomes yours." "If you'll have us," Haejun added, his charm softening the intensity of his brother's declarations. Sandra looked at their faces, identical features carved from the same genetic template, but different eyes. Taeyang's burned with protective fury. Jinwoo's held calculating respect. Haejun's offered careful tenderness. Sung-ho's assessed her with the precision of someone who saw everything, every flaw, every strength, every possibility. "I don't." Sandra couldn't form sentences, couldn't form thoughts. Her world had shattered and reformed in the span of 10 minutes. "This isn't?" "You don't have to decide now," Jinwoo said. His hand, she noticed he wore a single silver ring, gestured toward the cathedral doors. But you do need to leave. Brandon has debts you don't know about. Debts he's already put in your name. You're not safe here." Without waiting for her answer, Taeyang moved. He simply lifted Sandra into his arms, wedding dress and all, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing, like she'd never been too much of anything. The congregation erupted in shocked whispers, but the brothers were already moving. Carrying Sandra down the aisle between the pews, Haejun and Seung-ho flanked them. Jinwoo brought up the rear, his midnight blue suit a wall between Sandra and everyone who'd watched her suffer. Sandra looked back once, saw her mother standing, mouth open in shock, saw Brandon on his knees, holding his bleeding face, surrounded by rose petals and broken promises. Saw Pastor Williams clutching his Bible like a shield against forces he didn't understand. Then the cathedral doors opened. Sunlight poured in, bright and warm and blinding, and the Lee brothers carried Sandra out into it, out of her old life and into something new and terrifying and utterly unknown. Sandra woke to the sound of the city. Not the usual city sounds, not sirens or car horns or the perpetual hum of traffic that filtered through the thin walls of her East Harlem apartment. This was different, muted, like the world existed somewhere far below, too distant to touch her. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. The wedding dress was gone. Instead, she wore silk pajamas in a deep navy blue. The fabric felt like water against her skin. Expensive water, the kind that only existed in luxury hotels and penthouse apartments owned by people who didn't look at price tags. She didn't remember changing. Didn't remember anything after the cathedral doors closed behind them. After Taeyang had settled her into the back of a black SUV that smelled like leather and danger. After Jinwoo had made a phone call in rapid Korean while Haejun held her hand and Seung-ho typed furiously on his phone. The room around her looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a skyline she recognized. The Empire State Building, One World Trade Center, the Chrysler Building catching the afternoon sun, but from an angle she'd never seen. They were high up, very high up, higher than she'd ever been in Manhattan, except for that one time she'd gone to the top of the rock with her med school classmates. The bed beneath her was massive, king-sized, maybe California king. Dark wood posts reached toward a ceiling painted with subtle gold leaf patterns that caught the light and threw it back in gentle waves. Art hung on the walls. Real art, not prints. Original pieces that probably cost more than Sandra's annual salary. A glass of water waited on the nightstand, crystal, real crystal. Next to it, a small white pill and a note in precise handwriting. For the headache, non-narcotic. You fainted from stress. Our physician examined you. You're physically fine. Jinwoo. Sandra's hand trembled as she reached for the water. The glass was heavy, cold, perfect. She drank, then noticed the door. It was cracked open. Voices filtered through Korean, spoken too fast for her limited vocabulary to follow, but she caught the tone. They were arguing about something. About her, probably. Sandra stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. The silk pajamas moved with her like a second skin. She padded barefoot across hardwood floors that had been polished to a mirror shine and pushed the door open wider. The hallway beyond was just as stunning as the bedroom. More art, more floor-to-ceiling windows. More evidence that she'd been transported into a world where money wasn't a concern, where luxury was baseline, where people like her, people who worked 60-hour weeks and counted every dollar, didn't belong. The voices came from what looked like a living room at the end of the hall. Sandra moved toward them, her medical training kicking in. Assess the situation. Gather information. Don't make assumptions. She rounded the corner and stopped. The living room could have fit her entire apartment twice over. Maybe 3 times. A massive space with leather furniture arranged around a fireplace that probably cost more than her car. More windows. More art. More everything. And in the center of it all, the Lee brothers. They'd changed out of their color-coded suits. Now they wore casual clothes, dark jeans, fitted shirts, clothing that should have made them look less intimidating, but somehow made them look more dangerous. Like predators pretending to be civilized. Taeyang noticed her first. His dark eyes cut to her, and something shifted in his expression. The argument stopped mid-sentence. "You're awake," he said. Not a question, a statement. "How long was I?" Sandra's voice came out hoarse. 6 hours, Jinwoo answered. He sat in an armchair near the fireplace, one leg crossed over the other, a tablet resting on his knee. "You fainted in the car. Stress, most likely. We had our physician examine you while you were unconscious. He confirmed you're physically fine. No injuries, no concerning symptoms, just exhaustion. Your doctor examined me while I was unconscious? Sandra's medical ethics alarm bells started ringing. Without my consent? Your life was potentially at risk, Jinwoo said calmly. Consent becomes secondary when someone loses consciousness. I believe that's also medical protocol, Dr. Williams. Would you have done differently if a patient collapsed in your presence? Sandra wanted to argue. Couldn't. He was right. Your mother has been calling, Haejun said from his position near the windows. He held a phone. Sandra's phone, she realized with a jolt. Your friends. Brandon has been calling. We've been declining on your behalf. You can't just, Sandra started. Actually, Sung-ho interrupted gently, looking up from his laptop. We can, and we have. Would you like to know what Brandon said in his messages? He turned the laptop to face her. I took the liberty of recording them. For legal purposes. Sandra's stomach dropped as she heard Brandon's voice coming through the speakers. Slurred, desperate, angry. This is kidnapping, Sandra. You can't just disappear with 4 criminals. Come home. We can fix this. I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean, but baby, please. Sung-ho closed the laptop. There are 17 messages. They get progressively more threatening as they go on. By message 14, he's threatening to call the police. By message 16, he's threatening to sue you for defamation because of the information I sent to the wedding guests. I want to go home, Sandra said. Her voice was steadier now, stronger. I appreciate whatever this is, but I need to go home. No, you don't, Jinwoo said. The certainty in his voice made her bristle. Excuse me? You want to hide, Jinwoo continued, his dark eyes assessing her with uncomfortable accuracy. You want to disappear into your apartment and pretend today didn't happen. You want to call in sick to the hospital for a week and avoid every person who witnessed your humiliation. He tilted his head slightly, still watching her like she was a puzzle he was solving in real time. But you don't actually want to go home, Dr. Williams. Home is where Brandon has a key. Home is where he knows your routines, your security codes, your weaknesses. Home is where you're vulnerable. Sandra's grip tightened on the doorframe. Brandon wouldn't. Brandon has $470,000 in gambling debts, Taeyang said. He moved to a side table and picked up a manila folder. Thick. Heavy with papers. He crossed the room and handed it to her. He owes money to 3 different loan sharks, 2 underground casinos, and a Russian syndicate that specializes in breaking kneecaps when people don't pay. Sandra opened the folder with shaking hands. Bank statements stared back at her. Loan documents, cash advance receipts, credit card bills with interest rates that should have been illegal. And her signatures on everything. Perfect forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Oh my God, Sandra whispered. He forged your signature 3 weeks ago, Haejun said softly. He'd moved closer without her noticing, his voice gentle even as he delivered devastating news. Put your name on loan documents. Took out a second mortgage on your apartment that you knew nothing about. He was planning to marry you, consolidate your assets, and then disappear. Leave you with his debts and his enemies, Jinwoo continued. You would have lost everything, your home, your savings, possibly your medical license when the malpractice suit started. Sandra's knees went weak. She sat down hard on the nearest surface, a leather ottoman that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Malpractice suits? Sung-ho turned his laptop around again. This time the screen showed emails, text messages, plans laid out in black and white. Brandon had a backup plan, Sung-ho said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. He was going to claim you were unstable, that you'd made medical errors. He had someone willing to file false complaints with the medical board. 3 former patients whose cases he was going to use against you. He scrolled through the evidence with clinical precision. He wanted to destroy you completely, Dr. Williams. Leave you with nothing. No money, no career, no reputation, so you'd be too broken to fight back. So you'd accept the debts as inevitable. So you'd spend the next decade paying for his mistakes while he started fresh somewhere else. Sandra felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd cried enough today. Cried in front of 300 people. Cried in the SUV. Cried herself unconscious, apparently. She was done crying. Why are you telling me this? Her voice came out harder than she'd intended. Why do you care? The 4 brothers exchanged glances. Something passed between them. Some silent communication that came from sharing DNA and a lifetime of reading each other's micro-expressions. Taeyang spoke first. Because you saved our grandmother's life when you had no reason to. You sat with her all night during her cardiac event, Haejin continued, held her hand, spoke to her in broken Korean, even though your accent was terrible. You paid for our sister's cancer treatment, Jinwoo added. $300,000 from an anonymous donor. We traced it back to you. You nearly bankrupted yourself to save a child you'd never met. And now Brandon wants to take what little you have left, Sung-ho finished. So we're offering you an alternative. Sandra looked between the four of them. Identical faces, but different energies. Taeyang stood like a soldier at attention. Jinwoo sat like a king on a throne. Haejin leaned against the window like a model in a cologne ad. Sung-ho hunched over his laptop like a hacker in a movie. What kind of alternative? She asked carefully. A marriage alliance, Jinwoo said. Legal protection under the Lee name. Brandon's creditors won't touch you if you're one of us. His enemies will become very quiet, very quickly. In exchange, Taeyang added, you provide legitimacy to our organization. A respected surgeon married into the Lee family changes perceptions, opens doors, makes us look less like criminals and more like businessmen. Your organization? Sandra repeated slowly. You mean your crime syndicate? We prefer import-export business with aggressive negotiation tactics, Haejin offered with a slight smile. Taeyang's lips twitched. But yes, crime syndicate. Sandra should have been terrified, should have been screaming, should have been demanding they take her to the police, to the FBI, to anyone who could protect her from these dangerous men. Instead, she heard herself ask, all four of you? That's not even legal. One legal marriage, Jinwoo clarified. To me, most likely. The others are ceremonial, private, but equally binding in the ways that matter. You'll have our name, our protection, our resources. And if I say no, then we still protect you, Haejin said simply. His golden suit from the church might be gone, but something in his voice still carried that same warmth. We'll clear your name, handle Brandon, ensure you're safe, but you'll do it alone, Dr. Williams. He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. And we think you've been alone long enough. Sandra looked down at the folder in her lap, at Brandon's betrayal documented in black and white, at the evidence of how close she'd come to losing everything. Then she looked at the four men who'd watched her get destroyed in a church and decided to burn down her ex-fiancé's life in response. I need time to think, she said. You have until morning, Jinwoo said. Then Brandon's creditors come calling, and we need to know if you're under our protection or not. Sandra didn't sleep. She sat by the window in that borrowed silk pajamas, watching the city lights blur into dawn. Manhattan never really slept. Even at 4 a.m., she could see movement on the streets below. Cars. People. Life continuing regardless of personal catastrophes. The untouched tea Haejin had brought her at midnight had gone cold on the side table. When the brothers returned at exactly 7 a.m., she was still sitting there. Her natural hair, freed from the elaborate wedding updo that had taken 3 hours to create, fell in coils around her shoulders. All four entered together. They'd changed again. Casual now, but no less intimidating. Taeyang in black, Haejin in charcoal gray, Jinwoo in navy, Sung-ho in dark green, like shadows in different shades. I can't do this, Sandra said before any of them could speak. Her voice was steadier than she felt. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I have nothing to offer you. Nothing that makes this arrangement worth your time. Your medical expertise, Haejin started. Isn't exclusive to me, Sandra interrupted. She stood, wrapping her arms around herself. You could hire any surgeon as a consultant. You want legitimacy? Marry a socialite. Someone connected, someone who looks the part. What part? Taeyang asked quietly. Sandra laughed, bitter, broken. You were there yesterday. You heard what Brandon said. I'm too big, too much. I'm an embarrassment, not an asset. She gestured at herself, at the body that had been weighed and measured and found wanting her entire life. You don't need a wife who'll make people whisper, who'll make your enemies think you're weak for choosing someone like me. Stop. Jinwoo's voice cut through her spiral like a blade. He stood from his chair, setting aside his ever-present tablet. Do you know what date it is? Sandra blinked at the non sequitur. May 15th. 3 years and 2 months ago, Jinwoo continued. Our grandmother, Lee Hae-won, was brought into Mount Sinai's emergency room at 2 a.m, acute cardiac event. The attending physician took one look at an 82-year-old Korean woman with Medicaid and decided she wasn't worth the effort. Sandra remembered. God, she remembered. Dr. Morrison. the same doctor who'd later been fired for a pattern of discriminatory care. But that night, he'd still had power, still had authority. We were in the waiting room. Haijin picked up the story. His usual charm had evaporated, leaving something raw underneath. Taeyang was ready to tear the hospital apart. I was calling lawyers. Jinwoo was planning how to make Morrison disappear. Sungho was hacking into the hospital system to document everything. Then you appeared, Taeyang said. His voice was softer than Sandra had ever heard it. Not even on shift. You'd finished your rounds and were leaving. You were wearing jeans and a Columbia sweatshirt. Your hair was in a ponytail. You looked exhausted. Sandra closed her eyes. She remembered that too. She'd been planning to go home, take a hot shower, sleep for 12 hours straight. Instead, she'd heard Morrison's voice echoing down the hallway. Tell them to take her to a clinic in the morning. I'm not wasting resources on someone who's probably just having indigestion. You heard Morrison refuse treatment, Jinwoo said. You could have walked away, should have walked away. Morrison outranked you. You were a resident then. Intervening meant risking your career, risking his retaliation, risking everything you'd worked for. She was coding, Sandra whispered. I couldn't just. You could have, Jinwoo interrupted. Most people would have, but you didn't. Sungho had been quiet until now. He stood and moved to his ever-present laptop bag, pulling out a photograph. He handed it to Sandra. Her hands trembled as she took it. The photo showed an elderly Korean woman in a hospital bed, smiling despite the tubes and monitors. Beside her, a younger Sandra in rumpled scrubs, eyes exhausted but kind, holding the woman's hand. Sandra didn't remember anyone taking this picture. Our sister took it, Taeyang explained. Jiwoo, she was 16 then. Terrified she was losing the only mother figure she'd ever known. You saved our grandmother's life that night. You stayed with her for 14 hours, Haejun said, through 2 more cardiac events. You held her hand and spoke to her in broken Korean, telling her about your own grandmother, making her feel human when everyone else saw a liability. And then, Sungho said, his tech genius brain delivering facts with devastating precision. 3 months later, when Jiwoo was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, an anonymous donation appeared. $300,000. Enough to cover her treatment at Memorial Sloan Kettering, the best facility in the country. The donor requested no acknowledgement, no contact, just wanted the child to live. Sandra's throat tightened. That was supposed to be private, secret. She'd made the donation through so many shell accounts and intermediaries. We're very good at finding answers, Jinwoo said, reading her thoughts. The money was traced back to a trust fund, your trust fund, the inheritance from your grandmother that you'd been saving for years. You nearly bankrupted yourself for a child you'd met once. A child whose brothers are criminals, Taeyang added. You knew who we were, Dr. Williams. Morrison warned you, said we were dangerous, that helping our family would put a target on your back. Sandra remembered that too. Morrison's hissed warning after she'd stabilized their grandmother. Those people are gangsters. You helped them. You're complicit. Don't say I didn't warn you. I'm a doctor, Sandra whispered. I couldn't let a child die because of who her family was. Exactly, Haejun said, stepping forward. You saw past the surface, past the assumptions and the prejudice. You saw people worth saving. Jinwoo moved to stand directly in front of her, close enough that Sandra had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. So when you say you have nothing to offer, he said quietly, when you repeat the poison Brandon fed you about your body, about your worth, you're wrong. We don't see an obese woman, Taeyang said, his voice rough with emotion. That's Brandon's blindness, his failure, not yours. We see the surgeon who fought for our grandmother when no one else would, Haejun continued. We see the woman who gave everything to save our sister, Sungho added. We see a savior, Taeyang finished. And we've spent 3 years looking for a way to repay the debt, to honor what you did for our family. Sandra felt tears streaming down her face again. But these were different. These burned differently. Your body, Jinwoo reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face gently. Your curves, the softness Brandon weaponized against you. In our culture, in our family, these are signs of prosperity, of a woman who is well-loved and well-fed. You're not too much. You're abundant, Haejun said, built like the goddesses our ancestors worshipped. You're a queen who's been told she's a peasant for so long. She believed it, Taeyang added, his voice almost reverent. Sandra couldn't speak, couldn't process the way they were looking at her. Not with pity, not with tolerance, but with something that looked dangerously close to hunger. The marriage alliance isn't charity, Jinwoo said. It's us claiming the honor of protecting the woman who saved our family, of giving you the worship you deserve, of making sure no one ever makes you feel small again. Jiwoo is in remission now, Haejun said softly. She's 19. Pre-med at NYU. She exists because of you. Our grandmother lived another year after that night, Sungho added. Long enough to meet Jiwoo's college acceptance. Long enough to see her granddaughter survive. Because of you. We owe you 2 lives, Taeyang said. How do we repay that? Money means nothing. Gratitude is insufficient. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. So we offer you everything. Our protection. Our name. Our loyalty. And if you'll accept it, our hearts. Sandra looked at the 4 of them. These dangerous men who'd somehow seen past every insecurity she'd ever had, who looked at her body and saw abundance instead of excess. I don't understand how this works, she whispered. You don't have to, Jinwoo assured her. Not yet. Just say yes. Sandra thought of Brandon, of his cruelty, of every person who'd ever made her feel like taking up space was a crime. Then she thought of the Lee grandmother's hand in hers, of Jiwoo's grateful tears when Sandra had visited her in the hospital after the donation, of these 4 men who'd watched her get destroyed and decided she was worth burning the world for. Yes, Sandra breathed. Yes, I'll marry you. And 4 identical smiles, predatory, possessive, relieved, answered her. The celebration lasted approximately 30 seconds. Then Sungho's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression shifted. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Jinwoo asked, instantly alert. The kind where 3 of us want to claim her immediately and 1 of us thinks we're moving too fast, Sungho said, looking directly at Jinwoo. The temperature in the room dropped. Sandra watched as the unified front the brothers had presented cracked down the middle. Jinwoo's jaw tightened. Taeyang's hands curled into fists. Haejun stepped back, creating physical distance. You want to wait? Taeyang asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She just said yes. Brandon is out there planning his next move. Every hour we delay is an hour she's vulnerable. She's not vulnerable, Jinwoo countered. She's here. She's protected. But she also just had her life destroyed in front of 300 people. She fainted from stress 6 hours ago. And now we're asking her to marry 4 men she barely knows and join a criminal organization. He turned to face his brothers fully. Maybe, and I'm just suggesting this, we give her more than 8 hours to process before we start planning ceremonies. You're treating her like she's fragile, Sungho said, his tech genius brain analyzing the conflict like code, like she can't make her own decisions. I'm treating her like she's human, Jinwoo shot back. Like she deserves time to understand what she's agreeing to. She saved our family, Taeyang said, stepping forward. She's been saving people her entire life. Now someone's finally offering to save her, and you want her to wait? To think about it? To give Brandon time to make an informed choice, Jinwoo interrupted. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Sandra had been silent through this exchange, watching the brothers fracture in real time. But now she stepped forward. Stop, she said. All 4 of them turned to her. I appreciate the concern, Sandra continued, her voice steady. Both the claim her immediately concern and the let her breathe concern. But I'm standing right here. I can hear you. And I'm capable of speaking for myself. She looked at Jinwoo. You're right that I need time to process. Yesterday was, she paused, searching for words, catastrophic. But you're wrong if you think waiting makes me safer. Brandon knows where I live, where I work. He has keys to my apartment. He knows my schedule. Then she turned to Taeyang. And you're right that I need protection, but Jinwoo's also right that I need to understand what I'm agreeing to. Not just the marriage, the whole thing. Your organization, your enemies, what my life becomes if I say yes to this. She looked at Haejun and Sungho. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. No more careful revelations. No more protecting me from uncomfortable truths. I want to know exactly what the Lee family does, who your enemies are, what dangers I'm walking into. Sandra crossed her arms. And then, once I have all the information, I'll decide how fast we move. Deal? Silence held the room for 3 heartbeats. Then Haejun laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension like a hammer through glass. I told you, he said to his brothers. I told you she was a queen. Even Jinwoo's lips twitched toward a smile. Deal, he said. But fair warning, Dr. Williams. Some of what we're about to tell you is going to make you want to run screaming. I've survived this long, Sandra said. I think I can handle it. Sung-ho pulled up a chair. Then let's start with the family business, and why half of Koreatown calls us the Four Dragons of Manhattan. Sandra woke to voices outside her bedroom door 3 days later. Rapid-fire Korean, too fast for her limited vocabulary to follow, but the tone was unmistakable. The brothers were arguing again. She sat up, running her fingers through her natural hair. 3 days in the Lee penthouse had created a strange new routine. Mornings with Hae-jun, who brought her coffee with real cream and talked about everything except the situation. Afternoons with Sung-ho, who'd been teaching her the digital security protocols she'd need to know. Evenings with Taeyang, who'd insisted on basic self-defense training. If someone ever gets past us, he'd said, you need to know how to buy yourself 30 seconds. 30 seconds is all we need to reach you. And Jinwoo. Jinwoo appeared at random times, always with new information, always preparing her for the reality of being a Lee. Last night, he told her about their first kill. They'd been 17. A rival gang had gone after Jiwoo's school bus, planned to kidnap her for leverage against the Lee family. The brothers had intercepted them in an alley in Koreatown. We didn't plan to kill them, Jinwoo had said, his voice clinical. But when someone threatens family, planning becomes secondary to survival. Sandra had asked how many. 4, Jinwoo had answered. 1 for each of us. We've been careful since then, strategic. But that night taught us that some lines once crossed define who you are. Now, listening to the argument through the door, Sandra smiled despite herself. She'd learned to distinguish their voices. Taeyang's deeper bass, Hae-jun's smooth tenor, Jinwoo's measured cadence, Sung-ho's quick, analytical rhythm. The door opened without warning. Hae-jun entered, carrying a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. We're having a disagreement, he announced, setting the cup on her nightstand. About whether to tell you or surprise you. Tell me what? Sandra reached for the coffee. 3 days, and they'd perfected it. Cream, 2 sugars, dark roast. Jinwoo appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. That we've hired a styling team to rebuild your wardrobe. Hae-jun thinks springing 5 designers on you before breakfast is ambush tactics. It is ambush tactics, Sandra said, taking a sip. Perfect. But I'm listening. Taeyang entered last, already dressed in a sharp black suit. The designers are here. They've been waiting for 20 minutes. I don't need, Sandra started. Yes, you do, all 4 brothers said in unison. Hae-jun sat on the edge of her bed. Everything in your apartment, we had Sung-ho pull your closet inventory, is designed to minimize, to hide, to make you take up less space. His voice was gentle but firm. That ends today. Before Sandra could protest, she was ushered into the living room. Calling it a living room felt insufficient. The space could have fit her entire apartment 3 times over. And waiting there, surrounded by racks of clothing, fabric swatches, and equipment she couldn't identify, were 5 people who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and the posture of a general stepped forward. She wore all black. Not the hiding kind of black Brandon had insisted on, but the powerful kind. The kind that said, I'm in charge and we both know it. Dr. Williams, the woman said, her voice carrying an accent Sandra couldn't place. European, maybe. I'm Elena Rousseau. I've dressed 2 first ladies, 3 queens, and the wife of the UN Secretary General. She circled Sandra with an appraising eye that held no judgment. Only calculation. And none of them were as magnificent a canvas as you. Sandra blinked. I'm sorry, what? Your proportions are extraordinary. See, Elena continued. She gestured to her team. Marcus, tell me I'm wrong. A man with silver-rimmed glasses and more rings than fingers shook his head reverently. You're not wrong. She's a Rubens painting. She's a Botticelli Venus. She's been dressing for invisibility, Elena interrupted. She turned to the brothers. Who did this to her? A man who's no longer relevant, Taeyang said coldly. Elena nodded once, sharp, decisive. Good, because this body deserves worship, not apology. She looked at Sandra. I'm going to ask you questions, and I need honest answers. Not what you think you should say, what you actually want. Sandra's throat felt tight. I don't know what I want. Then we'll start with what you don't want. Jinwoo said from his position near the windows. What did Brandon make you wear? The question unlocked something Sandra hadn't known was locked. Black, she heard herself saying. Always black or dark navy. Nothing fitted. Nothing that drew attention. He said patterns made me look wider. Said bright colors were for... She stopped. For what? Hajin prompted gently. For women who could pull them off. The room went silent. Then Elena clapped her hands once, sharp as a gunshot. Marcus, bring the crimson silk. Yuki, the royal blue velvet. Carmen, that emerald wrap dress we've been saving. Diego, the gold brocade jacket. Move. Her team scattered like well-trained soldiers. Within seconds, fabrics began appearing. Bold, vibrant, unapologetic. Colors that demanded to be seen. I can't wear, Sandra started. You can, Elena said. You will. But first, measurements. The next hour was surreal. Sandra stood on a platform in the center of the living room while hands, professional, clinical hands, measured every part of her. Her waist, her hips, her shoulders, her thighs, her bust, her arms. The numbers were called out without commentary. No winces, no whispered concerns, just data. 48, 36, 54, Marcus called out. Classic hourglass. Marilyn Monroe proportions. Absolutely stunning. Sandra waited for the but. For the, we'll minimize this and downplay that. It never came. Instead, Elena started draping fabric directly on Sandra's body. Rich crimson silk that caught the light. Royal blue velvet that made her brown skin glow. A structured gold jacket that transformed her shoulders from something she tried to hide into a statement of power. Look, Elena commanded, turning Sandra toward a full-length mirror. Sandra looked and didn't recognize herself. The woman in the mirror wore a deep crimson wrap dress that hugged every curve. Cinched at the waist, flowing over her hips like water, the color made her skin luminous, made her presence undeniable. I look. Sandra couldn't finish the sentence. Like a queen, Hejin said softly. He'd moved closer without her noticing. Like someone who could run an empire, Taeyang added. Like someone who already does, Jinwoo corrected. You run an entire surgical unit, Dr. Williams. You make life and death decisions daily. You've always had this power. You just couldn't see it. Elena adjusted the neckline slightly. Your ex-fiancé dressed you for erasure. We're dressing you for conquest. She met Sandra's eyes in the mirror. Every piece I create for you will do 3 things. Celebrate your curves, command attention, and remind you that taking up space is your birthright. Yuki appeared with a structured royal blue coat. When she placed it over Sandra's shoulders, the effect was immediate. Powerful, elegant, untouchable. We're not hiding anything, Elena continued. We're showcasing everything. Your waist, your hips, your décolletage. Your body tells a story of abundance, of prosperity, of a woman who is well-loved. She paused. Why would we hide that? Sandra's eyes burned. I've spent my entire life trying to disappear. That life ended at St. Michael's Cathedral, Taeyang said, when you walked out of that church with us. Diego brought over the gold brocade jacket, structured, almost military in its precision, but softened with silk lining. When Sandra put it on over a simple black dress, she transformed. She looked like someone who could negotiate treaties, who could end wars with a look, who could walk into any room and own it. This is who you are, Hejun said. This has always been who you are. Brandon just convinced you that your power was shame. Elena pulled out her tablet, showing sketches, dozens of them. Day wear, evening wear, formal wear, casual wear. Every piece designed to amplify rather than diminish. We'll have 20 pieces ready by next week, she announced. 40 more by the end of the month. Shoes, accessories, everything. She looked at the brothers. She'll need jewelry, statement pieces, nothing delicate. Already ordered, Jinwoo confirmed. Sung-ho's been working with a jeweler in the Diamond District. Sandra turned away from the mirror, overwhelmed. This is too much. The cost is irrelevant, Taeyang interrupted. You're a Lee now, or you will be. And the Lee family doesn't do subtle. Besides, Hejin added with a slight smile, consider it back payment for Jiwoo's treatment. You gave us everything. We're giving you a wardrobe. Sandra looked at the racks of fabric, the sketches, the 3 men watching her with something that looked like pride. Then she looked back at the mirror, at the woman in crimson silk who stood like she owned the room. Maybe she did. Okay, Sandra whispered. Then stronger. Do it. Elena's smile was pure satisfaction. Oh, Dr. Williams, by the time I'm finished, New York won't know what hit them. And Sandra, seeing herself through the brother's eyes for the first time, believed her. 2 weeks later, Sandra stood in front of another mirror in another borrowed room, staring at her reflection and trying to remember how to breathe. The gown Elena had created was a masterpiece. Deep wine red, Taeyang's color, with a sweetheart neckline that showcased her décolletage, a cinched waist that emphasized her hourglass figure, and a skirt that flowed like liquid rubies with each movement. The back dipped low, revealing smooth skin and the elegant curve of her spine. Gold jewelry adorned her throat and wrists, not delicate pieces, but bold statement cuffs and a collar necklace that looked like armor. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo with strategically placed gold pins that caught the light like small flames. She looked like a weapon. "Stop," Heijin said softly from behind her. He wore a gold silk suit that should have looked ostentatious but somehow looked regal. "Stop what?" Sandra asked. "Stop looking for flaws." He moved to stand beside her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You're cataloging everything you think is wrong. Your arms, your back, the curve of your stomach under the fabric." "How did they always know?" "There are 400 people out there," Sandra whispered. "Important people, dangerous people. What if they think?" "They'll think exactly what we want them to think," Jinwoo said, adjusting his midnight blue cufflinks. "That the Lee brothers have claimed a queen, and anyone who disrespects her will disappear." The ballroom below them belonged to the Plaza Hotel, the Lee family's annual charity gala, ostensibly raising money for children's hospitals, actually a gathering where New York's underground power brokers negotiated territories, formed alliances, and settled disputes over champagne and carefully coded conversations. This year, there was a new attraction. The brothers were introducing their bride. Taeyang appeared in the doorway, devastating in deep wine red that matched Sandra's gown. "Ready?" Sandra took a breath, nodded, but was she ready? The doors opened. Music swelled, a live orchestra playing something classical and dramatic that Sandra's medical school education hadn't prepared her to identify. Every conversation in the ballroom died as the guests turned to watch. Sandra descended the grand staircase flanked by the four brothers, their color-coded suits a clear message. She belonged to all of them, and they to her. The crowd parted like water, creating a path to the center of the ballroom where a raised platform waited. Whispers followed in their wake. Sandra caught fragments. "Is that her?" "The surgeon?" "She's not what I expected. Look at that dress. The brothers, actually." "All four of them?" Jinwoo's hand tightened slightly on her arm. A reminder. They hear it too. They don't care. Neither should you. They reached the platform. Jinwoo stepped forward to address the crowd, his strategist's mind already calculating every word, every angle, every possible reaction. But before he could speak, a commotion erupted near the entrance. "I have an invitation." A familiar voice. Slurred. Desperate. "I'm supposed to be here. Sandra, Sandra, tell them!" The crowd parted again. And there he was, Brandon. He looked terrible. A poorly fitted suit that had seen better days. Bloodshot eyes, a yellowing bruise on his jaw from where Taeyang had struck him 2 weeks ago. His hair was greasy. His face, unshaven. He'd lost weight in the wrong places, the kind of weight loss that came from stress and whiskey and sleeping in your car. He pushed past security, stumbling slightly. His gaze fixed on Sandra with something between desperation and entitlement. "Thank God," Brandon breathed, lurching toward the platform. "Sandra, baby, we need to talk. This has gone far enough. I made a mistake, okay? I was stressed about the wedding, said things I didn't mean, but we can fix this. We can—" "Stop." Sandra's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. She was surprised by her own steadiness. 2 weeks ago, she would have trembled, would have apologized, would have made herself smaller. Not anymore. Brandon froze. "Baby, please," he said, his voice cracking. "These men, they've confused you, manipulated you. You don't belong with them. Come home. We can work this out. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever you want. Just—" The audacity, the sheer, staggering audacity. Sandra descended from the platform. The brothers moved with her like a 4-part shadow, but they didn't interfere. This was hers. She approached Brandon, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath and the desperation in his sweat. "You're right," Sandra said quietly. Every eye in the ballroom was on them. 400 of New York's most powerful people watching this moment unfold. I don't belong with them. Brandon's face lit with relief and triumph. "Exactly. So let's just—" "I don't belong with them," Sandra continued, her voice growing stronger, "because belonging implies equality, partnership, a relationship between peers." She took another step forward. Brandon actually backed up. "I don't belong with the Lee brothers, Brandon. I reign with them." The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. Sandra felt something shift inside her. Something that had been broken in that cathedral was healing, transforming, becoming something harder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous than before. You stood at an altar in front of 300 people, she said, each were liberate, surgical, and called me an embarrassment. You said I took up too much space, that I wasn't worthy of being photographed beside you. Do you remember that, Brandon? I was upset, Brandon stammered. I didn't mean... You forged my signature on loan documents. Sandra's voice cut through his excuses like a scalpel through skin. You tried to steal my inheritance. You planned to destroy my medical career and leave me with your debts. She tilted her head, studying him like he was a specimen under a microscope. And now you come here, drunk, in a cheap suit, thinking I'll forget all of that because you're desperate. Brandon's face flushed red. You think you're better than me now because you're whoring yourself out to 4 criminals? The temperature in the room plummeted. Taeyang moved, but Sandra held up one hand. She had this. I think, Sandra said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom, that I was always better than you. I just didn't see it yet. She gestured to herself, to the crimson gown, to the gold at her throat, to the woman she'd become in 2 weeks of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. You wanted me invisible, apologetic for existing. These men want me seen, want me powerful, want me exactly as I am. She stepped closer, forcing Brandon to crane his neck to look up at her. You called me obese like it was a crime. They call me abundant like it's worship. You saw weakness. They saw a woman who saved their family and asked for nothing in return. You saw someone to use. They see someone to protect. Sandra's smile was sharp enough to cut. So no, Brandon, we can't work this out. We can't go back. Because there's nothing to go back to. You destroyed it. In a church. In front of everyone. Security, Jinwoo's voice rang out, cold, final. Escort Mr. Hayes out and make sure he understands that his gambling debts have been purchased by the Lee organization. He now owes us $470,000. Brandon went white. What? No, you can't. We can, Heijin said pleasantly, and we have. You have 30 days to make arrangements. After that, he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We'll be creative. Sandra! Brandon's desperation cracked his voice as security grabbed his arms. You can't let them do this, after everything we had. We had nothing, Sandra said. You made sure of that when you tried to destroy me. She turned her back on him, ascended to the platform between her 4 husbands-to-be. You're dismissed, Brandon. Don't come back. They dragged him out, his screams echoing off marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Threats and apologies in equal measure. Promises and pleas that meant nothing. The ballroom doors closed, cutting off his voice. For 3 seconds, silence reigned. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory applause, but the kind reserved for a performance they'd never forget. The kind that said we witnessed something extraordinary and we know it. Sandra stood between the Lee brothers, trembling slightly as 400 of New York's most powerful people applauded her public execution of the man who tried to break her. Jinwoo leaned close to her ear. And that, Dr. Williams, is how a queen handles an ex-fiancé. Taeyang's hand found hers, squeezing gently. You're magnificent. You're terrifying, Sung-ho added with obvious pride. I'm slightly aroused. I'm definitely aroused, Haejun confirmed. Despite everything, the adrenaline, the fear, the residual anger, Sandra laughed. And as the orchestra began playing again and the gala resumed, she realized something profound. She wasn't scared anymore. She was free. Okay, stop. Pause. Take a breath. If you're still here, if you've watched Sandra go from humiliated bride to absolute queen in the span of 2 weeks, then you're my people. You understand that transformation isn't just about changing your clothes or your hair. It's about changing how you see yourself. It's about unlearning all the lies people told you about your worth. And if this story is hitting you in the chest, if you're feeling Sandra's journey like it's your own, then I need you to do something for me. Subscribe, please. Not just for me, though honestly, every subscriber helps me keep creating these stories, keeps me believing that representation matters, that our stories deserve to be told. But subscribe for you, because if this story resonates, there are more coming. More queens finding their crowns, more women refusing to shrink, more love stories where we're not the pity option or the before picture, where we're the whole damn fairy tale. And drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever had a Brandon in your life? Someone who made you feel like you were too much? And how did you reclaim your power? I want to know. Your story matters. Your journey matters. Now let's get back to Sandra, because Brandon might be gone from the ballroom, but he's not done yet. And what's coming next? It's going to test everything Sandra's learned about her own strength. Brandon sat in the back corner of a bar 3 blocks from the docks, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody paid in cash. His 4th whiskey sat in front of him, ice melting, golden liquid catching the dim overhead lights. His phone buzzed. Another message from the Lee organization's debt collectors. Day 14. 16 days remaining. Start praying. Brandon drained his glass and signaled for another. The bartender ignored him. Everyone ignored him now. Word had spread fast through New York's underground. Brandon Hayes was Lee property. Touching him meant consequences. You look like a man who needs an opportunity. Brandon looked up. A man had slid into the booth across from him. Chinese, mid-40s, expensive suit, eyes like a shark evaluating prey. Not interested, Brandon muttered. I think you are. The man placed a business card on the table. No name, just a number and a symbol, a serpent coiled around a sword. The Silver Serpent Society, Brandon said, recognizing the mark. A Chinese syndicate that had been testing Lee territory for months. We prefer investment group, the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm Mr. Chen, and you, Brandon Hayes, are an opportunity we didn't expect. I've got nothing to offer you. You have everything. Mr. Chen leaned forward. You have intimate knowledge of Dr. Sandra Williams, her routines, her weaknesses, her relationship with the Lee brothers. Something cold slithered down Brandon's spine. I'm not. You owe $470 to men who will kill you slowly when that deadline hits. Mr. Chen interrupted, his voice pleasant, conversational. We're offering you a way out, complete debt forgiveness, cash payment, new identity, a fresh start in Singapore. Brandon's hand tightened around his glass. What do you want? The Lees have been untouchable for years, 4 brothers operating in perfect synchronization, no weaknesses, no vulnerabilities. Mr. Chen pulled out a tablet showing surveillance photos. Sandra, leaving Mount Sinai, entering the Meridian Tower where the Lees own the top 4 floors. Shopping with Heijun in Soho. Then they acquire a bride, a civilian, a surgeon with no combat training, no security awareness, no understanding of the world she's entered. Mr. Chen swiped to blueprints. We need current security protocols, guard rotations, access codes, blind spots in their surveillance. Brandon stared at the blueprints, at Sandra's photo, at the woman who'd destroyed him in front of 400 people, who'd looked at him with such contempt, such certainty of her own worth, that he'd wanted to die right there on the ballroom floor. How much? Brandon asked. Mr. Chen's smile widened. 500,000. Half now, half when we have her. $500,000. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear. Enough to make Sandra and the Lee brothers pay for what they'd done to him. What exactly do you need me to do? Brandon heard himself ask. And as Mr. Chen began explaining the plan, the tracking devices, the timing, the extraction point, Brandon pushed away the small voice that said this was wrong. That voice sounded too much like the old Brandon. The one who'd loved Sandra once, before the gambling debts and the desperation and the crushing weight of his own inadequacy had turned him into something monstrous. That Brandon was gone. This Brandon had a choice, die in 16 days, or betray the woman he'd once promised to love. It wasn't really a choice at all. 3 weeks after the gala, Sandra's shift at Mount Sinai ran long. A 12-year-old girl with internal bleeding from a bicycle accident. 3 hours in surgery. Another hour monitoring recovery, watching vitals stabilize, making sure the repairs held. By the time Sandra stripped off her scrubs and changed into street clothes, a structured emerald blazer over black pants, courtesy of Alina's wardrobe revolution, it was nearly 11 p.m. Her security detail waited in the hospital lobby. 2 men from the Lee organization's private force rotated every 12 hours. Marcus and Jin, professional, armed, competent. She'd learned their names, their stories. Marcus had a daughter in middle school. Jin sent money back to his parents in Busan every month. They were good men doing a dangerous job. Long night, Dr. Williams? Marcus asked as she approached. The longest? Sandra said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Medical files she needed to review. A change of clothes for tomorrow. Her grandmother's pearls in a jewelry box she'd retrieved from her old apartment last week. The apartment she'd finally given up. Too many memories. Too many ghosts. She didn't notice the device Sung-ho would later find. Smaller than a button, nestled inside the velvet lining of that jewelry box. Transmitting her every movement, every conversation, every security detail for the past 7 days. The parking garage was quiet. Sandra's heels echoed off concrete as they walked toward the black SUV the brothers insisted she use. Marcus moved ahead to check the vehicle. Jen stayed close to her left side. Professional. By the book. Exactly as they'd been trained. They didn't see the van until it was too late. It came from the blind spot behind a support pillar. Tires screeching. Side door already open. 5 men in black tactical gear poured out like liquid shadow. Marcus went down first. A dart to the neck, some kind of tranquilizer. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Jin reached for his weapon. Never made it. 2 darts hit him simultaneously. He crumpled beside Marcus. Sandra ran. Taiyang's voice echoed in her head from their training sessions. Don't freeze. Scream. Make them work for it. Every second you delay is a second we're getting closer. She screamed. The sound bounced off concrete, loud enough to wake the dead. Her hand dove into her bag, fingers finding the panic button keychain Sung-ho had given her. Disguised as a car remote. Press it 3 times for immediate danger. She pressed it. Once. Twice. 3 times. A hand grabbed her jacket. The emerald fabric Elena had chosen specifically because it made her look like someone who could command armies. Sandra spun, using the momentum Taiyang had drilled into her, drove her elbow back into someone's face. Cartilage crunched. The satisfying sound of a nose breaking. Bitch! The man howled, releasing her. She made it 5 more steps before someone tackled her from behind. Her body hit concrete hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Her bag scattered, files exploding across oil-stained ground, the jewelry box skittering across the floor. Got her! Someone shouted. Sandra twisted, got one arm free, and raked her nails across her attacker's throat. Drew blood. Left marks. If they take you, Taiyang had said, mark them. DNA evidence. Something we can use to identify them later. She scrambled up, but there were too many. A 3rd man caught her from the front, pinning her arms. A 4th approached with a syringe. No! Sandra kicked out, connecting with someone's knee. Another scream. She was making them work for it. Making them bleed for it. But there were 5 of them and 1 of her, and her surgical skills didn't translate to hand-to-hand combat against trained operatives. The syringe plunged into her neck. Fire spread through her veins, then ice, then nothing. The world tilted sideways. Her legs went numb. Strong arms caught her as she fell, and through the chemical haze, she heard a voice she recognized, a voice she'd hoped never to hear again. Hello, Sandra. Brandon stepped into her fading vision. He looked different, harder, meaner, desperate in a way that made him dangerous in ways the old Brandon had never been. He crouched down as they dragged her toward the van. Did you really think you could humiliate me like that? Brandon's smile was vicious. Stand up in front of 400 people and destroy me? Choose 4 criminals over me? Sandra's tongue felt thick. The drug was working fast, pulling her under. Taiyang, she managed to whisper. Taiyang isn't coming. Brandon grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. None of them are coming. You know why? Because you're not as important as you think you are. You're just a fat surgeon they're using for legitimacy. You think they love you? You think you're special? Sandra tried to speak. Couldn't. They'll pay ransom, sure. You're an asset? But after this? After you've been compromised, used as leverage? Brandon leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. They'll throw you away just like I did, because that's what people do with things that are too much trouble. Tears leaked from Sandra's eyes. Not from his words. She didn't believe him anymore. Didn't let his poison touch her, but from rage. From the frustration of fighting and losing. From the knowledge that she'd been tracked, monitored, betrayed by a device she'd unknowingly carried into the brothers' home. Load her, Brandon ordered, standing. Mr. Chen wants her secured before the Lees start searching. They lifted Sandra into the van. The last thing she saw before they slammed the doors was Brandon's triumphant smile. The smile of a man who thought he'd finally won. The smile of a dead man who just didn't know it yet. The panic signal reached the Lee penthouse at 11:47 p.m. By 11:49, Taiyang had armed himself with enough weapons to wage a small war. By 11:52, Sung-ho had traced Sandra's tracker to a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. By 11:55, Jinwoo had mobilized 40 of their best soldiers and identified the building's layout, entry points, and heat signatures inside. By midnight, they were moving. 3 black SUVs tore through Manhattan streets. Traffic laws meant nothing. Red lights were suggestions. The brothers had one priority, Sandra. 18 hostiles inside. Sung-ho reported from the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his fingers flying across his laptop. Sandra's signal is stationary, basement level. 3 heat signatures with her. The rest are scattered across the main floor and perimeter. Rules of engagement? One of their soldiers asked over comms. Taeyang's voice came through the system. Cold as winter. Absolute as death. No survivors except Chen and Hayes. I want them alive. Everyone else is target practice. The warehouse belonged to a shell corporation that had taken Sung-ho exactly 4 minutes to trace back to the Silver Serpent Society. Mr. Chen's organization, the Chinese syndicate that had been testing Lee territory for months, probing for weaknesses. They'd found one, or thought they had. They were about to learn the difference between a weakness and a trap. The SUVs surrounded the warehouse. The brothers exited simultaneously, moving with the synchronized precision of men who'd spent their entire lives reading each other's thoughts. Taeyang in tactical black with wine-red accents, Haejun in black with gold details, Jinwoo in black with midnight blue trim, Sung-ho in black with emerald green highlights. War paint for the modern age. They didn't knock. Taeyang kicked the main door off its hinges. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. 6 Silver Serpent guards turned, weapons rising. They were still turning when Taeyang put bullets in each of their heads. 6 shots, 6 bodies, 3 seconds. Basement, Jinwoo directed, his strategist's mind already 3 steps ahead. Haejun, clear the west wing. Sung-ho, take east. I'll secure the perimeter. Taeyang, get Sandra. They split like a 4-pronged attack, each brother a weapon unto himself. Haejun moved through the west wing like a golden shadow. His reputation as the charmer, the diplomat, the soft one, made people underestimate him. They learned otherwise in their last seconds. The first guard he encountered was checking his phone, bored with guard duty. Haejun's knife entered under his ribs and punctured his heart before the man could draw breath to scream. The second and third guards were playing cards at a folding table. Haejun killed them both before the cards hit the floor. 1 knife throw, 1 bullet, simultaneous, efficient. The fourth guard heard something, turned, raised his weapon, too slow. Haejun closed the distance in 2 steps, disarmed him with a move their grandmother had taught them when they were 12, and snapped his neck with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. 8 men total in the West Wing, 8 bodies before any of them could radio for help. Haejun didn't waste bullets when a knife worked faster, didn't waste time when Sandra was bleeding somewhere below them. West Wing clear, he reported over comms. Moving to rendezvous point. Sung-ho dismantled the East Wing with calculated precision. The tech genius, the brain, the one who people thought lived behind computer screens and couldn't handle the physical work. They were wrong. Sung-ho had learned early that the deadliest weapon wasn't a gun. It was information, knowing exactly where to strike, exactly how much force, exactly which target mattered. He moved through the space like a surgeon himself, excising threats with targeted strikes. The first 2 guards were monitoring security feeds. Sung-ho's malware had been feeding them false data for the past 3 minutes, showing an empty warehouse, guards at their posts, everything normal. They never saw him coming. Suppressed pistol, 2 shots, both dead before their brains registered the threat. The third guard was in the bathroom. Sung-ho waited outside the door, patient. When the man emerged, still zipping his pants, Sung-ho's garrote wire was around his throat. 20 seconds of pressure. Unconsciousness. 30 more seconds. Death. The 4th and 5th guards were together, smoking by a window. Sung-ho shot the first one through the window glass. The second one spun, weapon rising. Sung-ho's second shot took him between the eyes. 10 men in the East Wing. 10 bodies. 0 wasted ammunition. 0 mistakes. East Wing secure, Sung-ho reported. All security systems compromised. They're operating blind now. Jinwoo secured the perimeter with the methodical efficiency that had earned him the nickname, the Architect. He didn't just see the battlefield. He saw patterns, probabilities, the domino effect of every action. 6 guards patrolled the warehouse exterior. They moved in pairs, communicating via radio, following a rotation that should have made them secure. Should have. Jinwoo had studied their pattern for 90 seconds, identified the gaps, calculated the timing. He killed the first pair during their radio check-in, using the sound of their own voices to mask his approach. Knife work. Silent, efficient. Their bodies hidden behind a dumpster before their partners noticed the silence. The second pair died 30 seconds later. Jinwoo used their confusion about the radio silence against them. They were looking at their devices when he struck. 2 bullets. Suppressed. Professional. The third pair were the most alert. Military training, Jinwoo assessed. Former special forces, probably. They'd sensed something wrong. Were scanning the shadows. Weapons ready. Jinwoo didn't give them time to react. He emerged from cover, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd trained in taekwondo since age 5. The first guard took a bullet to the kneecap, screamed. The second guard turned toward the sound. Jinwoo's second bullet found his throat. The first guard, still screaming, tried to raise his weapon. Jinwoo broke his wrist, disarmed him, put the final bullet through his skull. Perimeter secure, Jinwoo reported. No reinforcements possible. The building is ours. Taeyang descended the basement stairs to find 4 guards outside a reinforced door. They looked up as he approached, weapons rising in unison. Not fast enough. Taeyang's reputation as the enforcer wasn't metaphorical. He was violence personified, the one who handled problems that couldn't be solved with money or diplomacy or information. The one who made people disappear. The first guard died with Taeyang's knife in his throat. The second took 2 bullets, center mass, headshot, the way their father had taught them. The third and fourth guards fired. Bullets sparked off concrete where Taeyang had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. He moved like liquid shadow, like something that existed between heartbeats. He broke the third guard's neck with his bare hands, used the body as a shield against the fourth guard's desperate spray of bullets, then threw the corpse aside and beat the fourth guard's skull against the concrete floor until it stopped resembling anything human. The door was locked. Reinforced steel, multiple deadbolts. Taeyang shot the mechanism 3 times, kicked the door open. The sight that greeted him made his vision go red. Sandra hung from chains attached to an overhead pipe, unconscious, her emerald blazer torn, blood trickling from a cut on her temple, bruises forming on her wrists where the chains had bitten into skin. Rage, pure, incandescent rage, flooded Taeyang's bloodstream like napalm. But Sandra wasn't alone. Brandon stood in the corner, eyes wide with terror, watching Taeyang enter like death incarnate. Behind him, Mr. Chen held a phone, frozen mid-dial, probably calling for backup that would never arrive because Jinwoo had already jammed every signal within a mile radius. Wait, Mr. Chen said, raising his free hand. We can negotiate. Name your price. Taeyang shot him in the kneecap. Mr. Chen screamed, collapsed. The phone clattered across concrete. That's for touching her, Taeyang said. His voice was barely human, a predator's growl. He shot Mr. Chen's other kneecap. That's for taking her. Brandon bolted for a back exit, made it exactly 3 steps before Taeyang's hand caught his collar and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the concrete. Please, Brandon whimpered, blood running from his nose. I didn't have a choice. They threatened me. They said, You had a choice, Taeyang interrupted. His voice carried no anger now, just certainty, just the absolute inevitability of what came next. You chose betrayal. You chose to drug her, chain her, deliver her to men who would have killed her after they got what they wanted. He released Brandon. Let him collapse to the floor like the garbage he was. You don't get to want things anymore. You don't get to breathe the same air as her. You don't get to exist. Haejun and Jinwoo entered, their sections cleared. Sungho came last, already working on his laptop to document everything, evidence just in case they needed it later. Haejun went immediately to Sandra. His hands, the same hands that had killed 8 men in 3 minutes, were infinitely gentle as he checked her pulse. Examined her injuries with the careful precision of someone who'd taken battlefield medicine courses. She's alive, Haejun reported, his voice cracking slightly. Drugged, dehydrated, minor injuries. She'll survive. Unlike you, Jinwoo said to Brandon. His strategist's mask had cracked, revealing something vicious underneath. Something that remembered every slight, every cruelty, every moment Brandon had made Sandra feel less than she was. Brandon looked between the 4 brothers, blood-stained, armed, identical faces wearing identical expressions of controlled fury. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. I want lawyers, Brandon said desperately. I want police. You can't just... The police found your DNA at a crime scene tonight, Jinwoo interrupted, his voice clinical. The murder of 5 Silver Serpent gang members in a drug deal gone wrong. Very tragic. The evidence is compelling. Sungho made sure of it. That's impossible, Brandon stammered. I was here. And no one will ever find your body to prove otherwise, Sungho said pleasantly, looking up from his laptop. I've already scrubbed you from every database. Credit cards, phone records, social media, bank accounts. As of midnight tonight, Brandon Hayes ceased to exist. Jinwoo pulled out a knife, the same one he'd used to clear the East Wing. You wanted Sandra's inheritance. You tried to destroy her career. You forged her signature, stole her money, and then delivered her to her enemies. He tilted his head slightly, studying Brandon like a specimen. What do you think a man like you deserves? Brandon's bladder released. The acrid smell of urine filled the room. Taeyang carefully lifted Sandra from the chains, cradled her against his chest like she weighed nothing. His touch was infinitely gentle despite the blood coating his hands. Take your time with him, he said to his brothers. Make sure he understands what happens when someone touches what's ours. Wait, Brandon screamed as Taeyang carried Sandra toward the exit. Please, I'm sorry, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You're right about that, Heijin said, his charmer's smile turning predatory. He pulled out his own knife. We won't. Brandon's screams echoed through the warehouse, but there was no one left alive to hear them except the Lee brothers. And they had stopped thinking of Brandon as human the moment he put his hands on Sandra. Outside, Taeyang loaded Sandra into the SUV, brushed hair from her face with blood-stained fingers. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering. Taeyang. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here. He pressed his forehead against hers, feeling her breath, her warmth, the proof that she was alive. You're safe. I have you. The others? Finishing business. He strapped her into the seat, securing the seatbelt with hands that trembled slightly. They'll be out in a moment. Brandon? Taeyang's jaw tightened. Is being handled. Sandra's hand found his, surprisingly strong despite the drugs still in her system. Good. 15 minutes later, Heijin, Jinwoo, and Sungho emerged. Their clothes were more blood-stained than before. None of them looked bothered by this. Mr. Chen? Taeyang asked. Alive, Jinwoo confirmed. Barely. We'll use him to send a message to the Silver Serpents. Touch our family, lose your organization. And Hayes? Heijin smiled. Cold. Satisfied. Won't be found. They drove back to Manhattan in silence, Sandra unconscious between them, her head resting on Heijin's shoulder while Taeyang held her hand and Jinwoo monitored her vitals from his phone's medical app. Sungho drove, his tech genius brain already working on the cover story. The evidence trails. The digital footprints that would tell whatever story the Lee family wanted told. The city would whisper about this night for years. About 18 Silver Serpent soldiers who vanished. About a warehouse fire in Red Hook that destroyed all evidence. About Brandon Hayes, who disappeared the same night his ex-fiancée was briefly abducted. But the Lee brothers didn't care about whispers. They cared about the woman breathing softly between them. Alive. Safe. Theirs. Everything else was just necessary violence. The vineyard stretched across rolling hills in the Hudson Valley like emerald waves. Rows of grapevines heavy with fruit under a sky so blue it looked painted. No cameras, no congregation, no witnesses except the people who mattered. Sandra stood barefoot in the grass, feeling the earth solid beneath her feet. The dress Elena had created wasn't white. It was deep crimson silk that moved like liquid fire, cut to worship every curve, every line, every inch of the body Sandra had finally learned to love. Gold embroidery traced patterns across the fabric like flames. Her natural hair fell in thick coils down her back, woven through with tiny gold beads that caught the afternoon sun. She looked like a queen. She felt like one. 1 year. 365 days since Brandon had tried to destroy her at St. Michael's Cathedral. Since 4 identical men in color-coded suits had claimed her as their own. Since she'd stopped apologizing for existing and started demanding the world make room. The transformation had been gradual, then sudden, like waking up one morning and realizing the reflection in the mirror no longer made her flinch, realizing the hands that touched her at night worshipped instead of criticized, realizing that taking up space wasn't a crime, it was her birthright. You're thinking too much, Heijin said softly from her left. He wore a suit of pure gold silk, custom-tailored, looking like a prince from a modern fairy tale. I'm allowed to think on my wedding day, Sandra replied. Our wedding day, Jinwoo corrected from her right. His midnight blue suit brought out something fierce in his dark eyes. And you're not thinking, Sungho added from behind her, his emerald green suit catching the light. You're cataloging, comparing this moment to that day. He was right. She couldn't help it. That church had been full of people who'd watched her humiliation in silence. This vineyard held exactly 19 souls, Jiwoo, recovered and radiant at 19. Marcus and Jin, the guards who'd been drugged during her abduction and still blamed themselves. Elena Rousseau, a handful of the brothers' most trusted soldiers. People who'd proven their loyalty with blood. That ceremony had been about appearances. This one was about truth. Taeyang stepped forward from where he'd been speaking quietly with the officiant, a Korean elder named Mr. Park who'd known their grandmother. He wore wine red, deep as blood, and the way he looked at Sandra made her breath catch, even after a year of those looks. "Ready?" he asked. Sandra nodded, more ready than she'd ever been for anything. They decided to forgo traditional vows. Nothing about their relationship was traditional. Why should their wedding be? Instead, they'd written their own promises. Words meant only for each other. Mr. Park smiled and gestured for them to begin. Jinwoo spoke first. His strategist's precision softened with emotion. "Sandra, you saved my family when we were strangers. You gave everything and asked for nothing. I promise to spend my life ensuring you never regret choosing us. To protect you, honor you, and remind you daily that your kindness is strength, not weakness." Haejin continued, his charmers calm, cracking around the edges. "You taught me that worth isn't measured in dollars or influence, but in the courage to save a child you'll never meet. To sit through the night with a dying woman because no one deserves to die alone. I promise to treasure every soft part of you that the world tried to harden. To count your smiles like profit and your laughter like interest." Sungho's turn. The tech genius who saw everything. "You showed me that the most important code isn't written in programming languages. It's written in moments of compassion when no one's watching. I promise to see you, always, every part, every flaw, every strength, and to remind you that being seen is the greatest gift anyone can give." Taeyang spoke last. The enforcer, the violent one, the brother whose hands had killed for her. "You fight like a warrior even when you think you're weak. You pressed that panic button 3 times even while they were drugging you. You marked your attackers so we could find them. You survived." His voice roughened. "I promise to be the violence between you and anything that threatens your peace. To stand at your back. To remind you that soft doesn't mean breakable. It means undefeated by a world that tried to break you." Sandra's turn. She'd written and rewritten her vows a dozen times before accepting that perfect words didn't exist for what she felt. "A year ago, I stood in a church and learned I wasn't enough. I was too big, too soft, too much for the man who was supposed to love me." Her voice was steady. "You 4 looked at that same woman and saw a queen. You taught me that my curves are abundance, not excess. That taking up space is my right, not my crime. That being soft is bravery in a world that demands hardness." She looked at each of them in turn. "Jinwoo, who planned my protection with the same precision you used to dismantle rival organizations. Haejun, who held me through nightmares and whispered that I was priceless. Sungho, who sees everything I try to hide and loves me anyway. Taeyang, who killed for me without hesitation and cradles me with infinite gentleness." She smiled. "I promise to trust your eyes when mine lie to me. To stand beside you as an equal, not a rescued bride. To be the heart of this empire while you are its teeth and claws and mind. And to remind you daily that you didn't save me. You just helped me remember I was never broken." Silence held the vineyard for a heartbeat. Then Mr. Park laughed, a warm sound like summer rain. "I've married 500 couples," he said in Korean accented English. "Never heard vows like these, never seen a love like this." He looked at the brothers. "You may kiss your bride, all of you." They moved together like they did everything, synchronized, purposeful, overwhelming. Jinwoo kissed her first, soft, reverent. Haejin next, deeper, possessive. Sungho third, curious, exploring. Taeyang last, claiming her mouth like he was marking territory and worshiping a goddess simultaneously. When they pulled back, Sandra was breathless, laughing, crying, whole. Jiwoo cheered. The small gathering applauded. Elena wiped her eyes unashamedly. The brothers led Sandra to a table set under an arbor heavy with wisteria. No formal dinner, no speeches, just food, wine, and the people who'd proven they'd bleed for each other. As the sun set, painting the vineyard wine red and gold and midnight blue and emerald green, Sandra sat surrounded by her 4 husbands and realized something profound. That church wedding would have been a beautiful lie. This vineyard ceremony was an imperfect, bloody, complicated truth. And truth, she'd learned, was always worth more. Haejin poured wine. Jinwoo adjusted her chair closer to his. Taeyang's hand rested on her thigh, possessive and protective. Sungho pulled out his phone and took a photo, the first one he'd allowed to exist of this day. To Sandra, Jinwoo raised his glass. Queen of the 4 dragons. To Sandra, his brothers echoed. Sandra raised her own glass, meeting their eyes. 4 identical faces, 4 different souls, 4 men who'd chosen to love the woman everyone else said was too much. To us, she corrected. To the family we chose. To the empire we'll build. To every person who said I wasn't enough and lived to regret it. They drank, and in that vineyard, under that endless sky, Sandra Williams Lee finally understood what it felt like to be exactly enough. To be everything. So, we made it. You and me. We just watched Sandra go from broken bride to absolute queen. From a woman who apologized for existing to a woman who commands empires. And if you're still here, if you stayed for all of it, then you understand something important. This isn't just a story. This is a mirror. Sandra's journey is your journey. Her transformation is available to you. Her realization that she was never broken, just surrounded by people who couldn't see her worth, that's for you too. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit subscribe, please. Not just because it helps the algorithm or because my mom still thinks YouTube is a phase, but because every subscriber tells me that stories like this matter, that representation matters, that seeing ourselves as queens and not sidekicks is important. Second, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had a Brandon moment. Tell me what part of Sandra's story hit you hardest. Tell me what transformation you're working on in your own life. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Third, share this. Send it to that friend who needs to hear it. That sister who's still apologizing for taking up space. That cousin who's with her own Brandon and needs to see what's possible on the other side of leaving. Sandra's story started in a church where 300 people watched her suffer in silence. It ended in a vineyard where she chose her own family, her own power, her own truth. Your story can end that way too. You are not too much. You are not an embarrassment. You are not someone's placeholder until something better comes along. You are abundant. You are powerful. You are exactly enough. And anyone who can't see that, they're not your people. Find your 4 dragons. Find your people who see you as royalty. Find your tribe who would burn the world down to protect you. They're out there, and you deserve them. I'll see you in the next story. Stay powerful. Stay soft. Stay exactly who you are. Because the world needs more queens who refuse to shrink.